Hi, welcome back. I'm Terry Burns, and this is a continuation of and a conclusion of the major part of my course on the Monas Hieroglyphica or Hieroglyphic Monad of Dr. John Dee. So those of you who have studied along with me all these weeks, congratulations. You have made it to the final theorem, Theorem 24. And if you have looked ahead, you know that this is indeed a rather short and rather easy theorem. So it is in one sense an end, but we've also seen that he is setting up a whole kind of path of initiation in 21 and 22. So in another way, for me at least, when I got to this point the first time, it was just the beginning. You're used to my usual disclaimer at this point where I tell you it's an advanced class, that I'm assuming you know who D is, that I'm assuming you know what the Monas Hieroglyphica is, and I'm assuming that you have read and understood everything that comes before. Although um, hopefully you are, but it won't really matter for this theorem. If you, for some reason, are just joining in here at the end, well, ends are beginnings. I've got a playlist for the whole course below, 4 different playlists, in fact. And I know we also still need to talk about your homework for that last chart at the end of 23. I'll have that out by this weekend. But let's just jump into this final and very short theorem, okay? This is all the text that is there except for his sign off. I'm going to go back through it in a moment. But then after going through this text, you get this little symbol where D will say the intellect judges the truth, contact at a point, hear the common eye, and the multitudes will be surrounded by darkness and despair. Why? Because they won't have understood much of anything he said. But you will not despair because you have understood most of what he said, or enough, at least I hope, that having put in the time and made it to this point, that you don't despair. By the way, this little glyph here, you see a lot of people have looked at it and thought, oh, that looks like an eye. Here, the common eye. And given D's work in optics, that makes sense. Also, you can see a little dot in the middle of the circle. So it is like a sun symbol, like a symbol for gold, or like the actual Pythagorean symbol of a monad. You may have gotten really good at what transforming letter symbols into other things. So you might even see it as a stylized omega. Some people have even seen it as a stylized alpha, though I don't as much as they do. I see it more as an omega, but the alpha and the omega, the beginning and the end. And let's now jump back in to this short paragraph. You probably by this time will get the illusions before I tell you what they are, but let me just read through this to you and we'll go over it together. He says, here, as in the opening of our little book, we began with a point, line, and circle. We in this way would make straighter perpendicular lines of the furthest elemental effluxions out of our monadic point and circumconduct a circular figure altogether analogous to the equinoctial, completing its circle in 24 hours. Okay, the straight and perpendicular lines he began in the first theorem by talking about the rectilineum, right? And we know that recta is the Platonic restoration of the good, like the Gnostic ascent of the one, for example. And rectitudinous, can also mean a perpendicular lines, like a right angle. But then pretty quickly, he is just saying lineum, meaning all of those things. And then when we talk about the equinoctial, well, we don't get that until the world that he has symbolically created in the first 10 theorems falls. So through the first 10 theorems, we have seen him superimposing his different major cosmogenic texts, Plato's Timaeus, which is a kind of Pythagorean creation story, biblical Genesis, of course, and the Sefer Yetzirah, the creation of the world by the 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet. But once the world falls, in all 3 of those contexts, then time begins. That's Theorem 11, Aries of Aries at the spring equinox, time begins. And it's also important at the spring equinox, day and night are equal. Well, jump ahead 10 more theorems after his symbolic world has ended in Theorem 20 and he has his vision of revelation. What happens after that? Well, by that, many things, but one of them is he has brought in his what I've called his secret text, Codex Marcianus Graecus 299, an ancient Greek text he copied by hand, never listed in his library catalog. And we have seen how certain theorems take on added meaning from 15 on, when we looked at Isis the prophetess to her son Horus, which would have been heretical in Dee's time to have, an Egyptian goddess merging with a Hebrew archangel and the things we talked about there. Then in 21, we get his Path of the Initiate, and we talked about some works by Zosimus of Panopolis in that same work. So what does that have to do with 24 hours? Everything in a certain sense, because those works of Zosimus and the Isis the prophetess letter are written at the beginning of the Common Era. Dee is dealing with copies of copies of copies. They're before the fall of the Library of Alexandria, where the center of Greek language and culture is not in Greece, but the Ptolemies, the last pharaohs, are Greek. It's in Egypt. And so in that time, it's basically the age of appropriation, that Egyptian, Christian, Jewish, pagan, like Greco-Roman gods and goddesses just get merged in a way that I find particularly delightful, but in Dee's time would be totally heretical. So one of the things that gets merged is the concept of the god. So what happens at dawn every day in Christian or Jewish or pagan Egypt of that time? Ra rises on the eastern horizon, lives 12 hours, and Ra dies in the west. Ra goes through the underworld, where if one has lived a good life and is fortunate, particularly if one is a pharaoh, one merges with Ra, who is born and dies every day in 24 hours. That's the motion there. Those of you who want to go through it another time, you can also extrapolate other things about great world ages, even processional astronomy if you want, though I haven't really talked about that a lot here. To continue on, he says, accordingly, we shall now at last here in our 24th theorem, 24 hours, 24 theorems, consummate and conclude. Why consummate? Well, we've talked about the sacred marriage, and Dee even set up his Gameia as earth of marriage, a reference to Hierogamos, but the idea of the Hierogamos he's been working with is the merger with the divine, becoming anointed, becoming the Christos. Consummate and conclude the omnimodal, that is, all modal metathesis. You know what metathesis means. We've talked about it in the last few theorems, his moving points around into or structures around into different places. And number defined 24. What is defined? The metamorphosis of the quaternary. Remember, with his Pythagorean and artificial quaternary, in those cases, in the last theorem, we got a 24. To the honor and glory of him, John, Archbishop of Divine Mysteries and witness in the fourth and last part of the fourth chapter of the Apocalypse, who sits on his throne in the midst of and encircled by four animals. Now, from here to the end, what Dee is going to be doing is basically referring to that same part of Revelation that he referred to in Theorem 20, when his monadic world symbolically ended and he had a vision of the apocalypse as a doubled cube. Those of you who are in initiatory groups, I can't help but wonder if that double cube that many of you use is influenced by this, because I've talked about often how Dee has influenced Rosicrucianism, among other things. Okay, so who he's talking about here, John, Archbishop of the Divine, he tells you, right? This is John, who has written the book of Revelation, which is a revelation of the sort that one has doing angel magic or contemplating the divine or having a hierogamos with the divine. And in fact, we're going to see Dee basically from here to the end paraphrasing parts of the book of Revelation. I'm not going to give you an exact quote because I'd have to do it in Greek. There are all kinds of different translations. Some are good, some aren't, that you have all of that to explore on your own. And many, many people have done it, because whatever one thinks about the book of Revelation, and I say this as someone who is not even nominally Christian, it is the most fascinating study of symbolism I think I have ever seen, even more so than this wonderful text. Okay, so um, who sits on the throne in the midst of and encircled by four animals. Well, wait a minute. Why is he doing it this way? No, this isn't a mistranslation. It is John in parentheses who sits on the throne, but that's Jesus. Because by having the revelation, John has merged with the Christos. He has become an anointed one. And so I'll paraphrase what goes on here, that in this fourth part of the fourth book of Revelation, there is a door that is open into heaven. John sees it. John kind of energetically goes through it. Sounds like the motion of the Monas Hieroglyphica, right? And he sees the one on the throne. That is Jesus, Yod He Shin Vav He, as we've talked about, surrounded by 24 thrones. Some of you may still be looking at the homework for 23. One of the things you had to look at there was why 25, 1 and 24. Yod He Shin Vav He in the center, the anointed one in the center, and the elders or seniors around. That's the same word in Dee's Latin that he uses, by the way, in the later Enochian work to talk about Enochian seniors. So in the center are four living creatures covered with eyes and having 6 wings. So there's another 24, right? 4 times 6, 24. One's like a lion, one is like an ox, one is like a man, one is like an eagle. They repeat the words that he has here, and they're saying, holy, 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 over and over again, day and night. And then later on in that same part of the book of Revelation, they cast down their crowns and they say the lines that Dee has paraphrased at the end here. So we'll go through this again. Who sit on the throne in the midst of and encircled by 4 animals, each having 6 wings, which day and night without rest say, holy, 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 Lord God Almighty, who was and who is to come. There is another ternary. And around whom, even now, from their 24 encircling seats, the 24 elders, wait, how are they doing it now? This is after the world ends, because we have seen, and you can demonstrate by looking at the Greek in the New Testament, that the way these things are described is in present tense, as if they exist now, but we just aren't aware of it. Talked about that earlier. So even now from their 24 encircling seats, the 24 elders prostrated, their golden crowns cast away, adore, saying, worthy art thou, Lord, accept the glory and honor and power, for thou hast created all things, and because of thy will they are and have been created. Amen. Says the fourth letter, delta, that's D. Elsewhere, D has signed his name, like in a letter to a later Holy Roman Emperor, Rudolph II. He signed his name as the fourth letter of 3 alphabets, that is D, delta, and dalet in Roman or Latin letters, Greek, and Hebrew. And then we're back to that sign, and that's it. The intellect judges the truth, contact at a point. Oops. Here the common eye will be surrounded by darkness. But you hopefully will not be, because you have understood the hieroglyphic monad. I'll be back one more time to wrap up the homework for Theorem 23, and then I'm going to talk about some of the things that I mentioned months ago that you could do with the hieroglyphic monad before Alan Moore and I start our course on Dee and Kelly's later Enochian work. But that's it for today. Congratulations, you did it. And I will see you again next time. Bye-bye.